Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. Nice to have you with us. It's a beautiful, sunshiny, late spring day here in the mountains of West Virginia, and we're happy to have you with us today as we dig deeply into some subjects about what in the world is coming downstream on the horizon. I'm joined today, as I always am, by friends on our panel. Greg Braden. Hi, Greg. How are you, man?
I am well. I wish you'd send some of that
Yeah.
sunshine and spring here. We have had we made national news with the hailstorms on I-25 and here in northern New Mexico. So I am personally good, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Oh, well, good. Frank Jacob, how are you? How are things in Germany?
How are you, John? Good to see you, my friends. Yeah, it's an interesting time in Germany. Weather-wise, if we're starting with that, it's rainy and crappy where I am and cold. I thought actually might have to pull all the plants in from outside because it would freeze overnight. So much for spring, but it's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the German country right now with respect to elections and all kinds of stuff. So it's been fun watching and being
Uh,
around for that.
Good. Penny Kelly, how are you, my friend?
I am great, and it is a beautiful day here finally. So,
Good.
yeah, I'm looking forward to today, and I'm celebrating that all of us are here. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Yeah. Try to get everybody off the road.
I know.
So let's go around as we always do and check in and say what you've been thinking about. Been on your mind, Penny?
You know, the biggest thing has been my concern, my worry that the American people are not understanding the depth of what's going on at
Mm.
in any of the sectors, but especially in the tariff or the financial sector. They don't see what the backstory is, what the back thinking is. And I think they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, and that concerns me a lot. The other thing that has concerned me a whole lot is the media that goes right along with that. The media is still, they don't know how to look for anything positive or hopeful. They just keep pushing all of this. Oh, and this is bad and that's awful and and people think this. And I'm like, how do you know what people think? And that really bothers me. And so not only that, but the fact that I the more that I look forward, the more I think we need a much more sophisticated leadership than what we've got. Some kind of leadership that has a spiritual component, and that doesn't ignore the material, but that sees a different world and what's possible. And I don't see any signs of that. The Western model, they're still using the same model that we had when I was born. That's just, to me, not going to work. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Frank, what do you think?
Well, I think Penny's right on the money with that. In fact, I've been looking, like I was just mentioning, the German election, right? Well, it's funny because the German Chancellor that was voted, Friedrich Merz is called, right, was almost didn't get voted in. It's unprecedented. It never happened in German politics that the chancellor would be, because in Germany, the people, they don't run like in America, like where there's a popular vote for one guy. The parties actually vote their chancellor in, and they voted and he didn't get enough votes, so they had to vote a second time. But it's interesting because I started looking at it and I realized, okay, I'm I guess a citizen of both of those countries, both Canada and Germany. Canada also just had an election. And so I'm looking at these two guys and I'm realizing, hey, they're both ex-banksters, And it's proof that, basically it's funny because at this moment there's like 134 countries and currency unions, which makes up like 98% apparently of global GDP that are exploring or piloting CBDCs, right? That's
Yeah.
94% of central banks working on like projects for digital currency. And the political leaders that they need to bring that in, who are they going to select? Well, of course, they're going to have to pick people that have deep financial credits, right? And who do they pick? Well, it turns out, guess what? Friedrich Merz spent from 2016, I think, to 2020, he was a chairman of BlackRock Germany. We all know that BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager, and all they've been trying to do is figuring out how to integrate tokenized securities and into digital euro wallets and all that, right? And at the same time, the ECB, the European Central Bank, is trying to get into a phase where they're running innovation workshops and all these things where they're going to get that happening. And who's the guy in Canada? Well, it's Mark Carney. Well, what is Mark Carney? What is his background? Well, it turns out he spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs, right, before moving into central banking, where then he headed the Bank of Canada, right? And then he headed the Bank of England even, right? So this guy is all about championing the idea that central banks need digital alternatives, and they're pushing for currency. So these things are coming, my friends.
Yeah.
The train is coming full at us. And Penny, you're totally on the money. People are completely asleep at the wheel right now as this stuff is happening. And they think, oh, just another election. But we all know there's no such thing as election, it's only selection.
Okay, Greg, what do you
Well,
think?
Well, I'm tracking what everybody else is tracking here. I will talk a little bit less about it now because I think it's going to flow into the topic of the day. But we are, Penny, I'm with you. The American people and the people of the world at large are not really cognizant of the magnitude of the global financial reset that is happening right now. And July 1 is going to be, I think, what really gets their attention. And I'll talk about why that is. So the global financial, not the economic reset, but the financial reset has been on my mind, number one. Number two, I have been watching very closely the power outage that happened in Europe this last week. It's the largest power outage that the continent of Europe has ever seen. America downplayed it. Spain, Portugal, primarily, parts of Germany, parts of France, parts of Italy. Immediately, the authorities came out and suspected the cyber attack, and immediately they began to downplay that. As I've looked into it, it has all the hallmarks of a cyber attack. And what concerns me is when we see things like this happening, it's like a test run for something on a larger scale. And I'm watching that very closely. So that's number two. Of course, the death of the Pope, not so much the death of the Pope, but the concern of who the new Pope will be and what that Pope's position is going to be because of the influence the church has on governments, on politics, on finance, and also on revelations. How much of what is in those Vatican vaults? There was one corridor that was opened recently, and John, I'm going to talk about that a little bit when I'm there at the end of this month. But even access to the Shroud of Turin and the DNA tests that the church has been reluctant to allow, that is all determined by who is in power and whether or not this Pope will allow those things. So the last thing I'm watching is showdown between U.S. and Iran. American media is downplaying it. Iran wants nuclear capabilities. America is saying you have to decide within a matter of days whether or not we're going to negotiate or we're going to take out those facilities. Iran just unveiled a new class of weapon systems that apparently publicly anyway, caught the American officials off guard. They didn't know they had these. They're not nuclear, but they have the ability to really retaliate against not just American, but allied bases and things like that all through the Middle East. So I've been watching those this last week. That's what's been on my radar.
Yeah. Well, good. I've been thinking a good bit about, there are many indications that suggest that there's going to be a currency reset and that it's really quite close. And people are scrambling in my orbit, are scrambling all over the place, trying to position themselves for this whole thing. And so, and some are arguing that it already had started quite some time ago and where it's just kind of working its way through a whole thing. And the implications of that are profound. And particularly, I just had a friend call me this morning and said, I just sold an apartment building and I'm sitting on all this cash. What should I do? And concerned that, in a matter of weeks, it could turn into not much. And if they do a reset. And so anyway, it's a very interesting time for sure. Well, thank you all. It's time for our topic. And what I was wondering, we're full into this big change in ways that we've just kind of talked about in the past. And you've got so many moving parts, and it's kind of assaulting the fundamentals of how we describe this reality and what's real and who we are and all those kinds of things. And clearly you're going from one state to another, from one era to another, from, call it whatever you'd like, a jump, ascension, whatever it is. And I've been impressed lately that this is a kind of a full spectrum, little trek that we're on. That it is not, we spend a lot of time thinking about the physical kind of stuff, how to get ready. I mean, I do a lot of that here in Berkeley Springs, food and water and communications and things like that. But that's easy to kind of get fixated on those issues and miss the point that there are other layers in this kind of Maslow hierarchy approach to thinking about who we are and where we're going here. And so there are social things, and there are kind of emotional things, and there are spiritual things, all that if you buy the kind of basic notion that we're becoming a new human, that it's going to be a full-fledged kind of human. And it's not going to be a new human in terms of how you collect water and stock up for food. It's going to be up at these higher levels of the hierarchy about who you essentially are. And so what I thought we'd talk about today is kind of this full spectrum look at what's happening here. And it's not so much to spend a lot of time on each one of the individual things, but it'd be really nice to, in almost a brainstorming fashion, to kind of lay on the table all of the different kind of pieces that are associated with this transition, and making sure that we cover every one of these layers, the spiritual, the emotional, the social, as well as the physical. So Greg, let's start with you.
Well, John, I came at this from a couple of different perspectives. I alluded to a little bit earlier when we went around of what's been on our mind. I think you asked specifically the next 2 years. You said, what changes might we see during the next 2 years of this transition? I think the one that is going to grab people, some people are going to be surprised. Some people who have been in denial will no longer be in denial, is what we just mentioned. We are in the midst of a financial reset. And that is going to impact every life of everyone who's engaged in any way in any kind of commerce in our lives day. Finances is more than money. One of the things that is happening, and they're downplaying this in the U.S. Right after the 2008 financial crisis, there were a series of meetings that became known as the Basel I meeting that provided the framework for how money works and what central banks need to do to stay in business. That was followed by Basel II. Basel III is happening right now. Very few people are talking about it. And what it's doing, and this doesn't make any sense, but this is what they're doing. Gold has always been considered a risky asset. So it was moved to tier 3, which is considered a risky asset, and banks are not allowed to keep a lot of it on the balance sheet. And America, who has a lot of gold, has not been allowed to use that to offset their debt because it was priced at $42 an ounce and considered a risky asset. Beginning July 1st, all that changes. Gold will become a tier 1 asset. Banks will be required to have more tier 1 assets, and not paper, I mean physical. And you're seeing a movement of gold in this planet like you've never seen. Nations are buying it. Central banks are buying it. It's moving across borders. And that is going to have a tremendous impact. It has the potential of leading America to be a debt-free nation. If our gold that we have on the balance sheet is valued at current prices and considered a tier one asset, we have little, if any, debt. And that will spark a movement of innovation and growth, unlike anything that we've ever seen across new sectors as well as old traditional manufacturing sectors. So I want to start out with, I think it could be a good thing. It's all about the thinking underlying it. Who's doing it, why they're doing it. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, because Frank mentioned central bank digital currencies are going to be part of this great reset. And we've talked about that in other, in other episodes that we have here. Next 2 years, the other thing that I'm seeing is where they get their information from. We live our lives and we make our choices based on what we believe to be true about the world. And we rely upon information sources, conventional information sources. A lot of people used to rely on what we call the news, network news, which is changing very, very quickly. I had some interesting numbers here. Between 1972 and 2024, we went from 70% of our population trusting the information sources. We're now down to about 30 to 31%. So people don't trust mainstream anymore. And what they're watching has shifted. Mainstream news, Fox News only has about 3 million viewers prime time in a nation of 330 million people. MSNBC only has 1 million, and CNN has only 558,000, and that's because they're in the airports. They're required to be in the airports that we watch. On the other hand, Joe Rogan has got 14.5 million views on his Spotify account, and he's not alone. There are other people who are relying more on alternative sources. So the point of that is the next 2 years, it's going to be very difficult for the powers that be to control the narratives that direct the way that people vote, the way that people spend their money, the choices they make in their lives. It's going to be very hard to reel that in the ways that it's happened before. Next 2 years, we're definitely moving toward a deeper technocracy. And we've all talked about this. I think that's probably the most concerning of all the things that are happening. I just did a little quick look-see to see where this is right now. Elon Musk, his Starlink, I didn't realize right now he's got 12,000 satellites by the end of this year, and they have applied for and will be granted permission for another 30,000 of these satellites. That's about 42,000 in total. What we're seeing is the build out of a control grid is the term that's being used. And I think we're going to see that control grid, not just through those satellites, but through the technology that we use in our everyday lives. World Economic Forum in February, in a single sentence, stated the goal that defines where they want the nations to move. They said, we are looking at emerging of the natural, the digital, and our biological lives. So there is definitely a concerted effort to merge all of these, and that control grid is necessary for that. All of this pushes us to think of ourselves in new ways. And for some people, they feel they're not equipped to think of themselves in new ways, and they're going to be all in on all this technology. I think we will see a greater bifurcation of our society. We're going to see a portion of us that are all in. They want to live in 15-minute cities. They don't want to own anything. They will be on a lease as needed system. They're going to take technology into their homes, into their lives, and into their bodies. And then you're seeing another facet of our society That's like the pendulum that has swung so far to the other side. They're rejecting everything. And I'm surrounded by those people, good people in our rural community here in northern New Mexico, who are going back to basics, growing their own food, healing their own bodies, educating their own kids, taking them out of public schools and out of mainstream. And I think the next 2 years, we will see that bifurcation. Beyond that, I think we will find a place in between. I think both sides are going to find that we need the technology, but we need it not in our bodies, but outside of our bodies. But getting to that place, I think both sides are going to go to the extremes, and we're going to see those extremes in the next 2 years. We will be coerced, we will be enticed, we will be mandated and indoctrinated to accept this technology into our lives and into our bodies. And so what this does, John, for those that begin to question this, they have to come to terms with who we are as a species. And this is where it gets really exciting for me, because the peer-reviewed science is out there. It's not in the mainstream. We're not what we've been told. We're so much more than we've been led to believe. This ties back to the question that Frank was talking about a few moments ago, the 5G, 6G. We're not going to stop that. We are such a highly advanced, technologically sophisticated form of life. We are a soft technology that we can morph and adapt to whatever it is that life brings to our doorstep. And to do that, we have to make choices in our lives to be the best version of ourselves. And we all know, what those are: thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, nutrition, movement. Those are epigenetic factors that free us from that control grid and that free us from those factors. So next 2 years, I think we're going to see a very pronounced movement toward the technocracy, and we'll see a pronounced division among our friends, our neighbors, even in our own household. Husbands, wives, kids, and parents are going to make different choices. And I think it's going to be our society is going to be tested in a way that we've never seen before.
Yeah, very well said. Penny, what do you think?
Well, there's so much here. Okay. So if we take, what are how did you word that? What kind of changes might we see during the next 2 years of this transition? So I took that and said, well, what's going to be driving those changes? I had some of the same things that Greg talked about, but the one that came to the top for me was the big split. And Greg used the word entice, that we were going to be coerced, we were going to be enticed. That's exactly the same thing I was just looking at. They are going to put out the CBDCs, and the big hook for most people is going to be, hey, this is a really good way for us to control the corruption. And if you want to get rid of corruption, you just sign up here. And, it's like, do you not see past that, people? And they won't. And that split then becomes even wider. I saw one of the big changes was a move onto what I'll call, or into Indian reservation territory in order to be able to claim something governmental. It wasn't clear, it was kind of a foggy kind of insight that came, but it was people's attempt to get away from the US government and the technocratic direction that much of that was going in. So there were also some big pushers, things pushing people, empty shelves. The tariffs are well meant, but they are going to result, and Walmart has said there's going to be less on the shelf. So that, I think, is going to frighten people, and they're going to turn more and more like, Trump, you need to stop this, and Trump, you have to quit. And that's part of the turning against Trump that I have seen and saw right from the day he was elected. I was like, oh, wow, we finally got somebody we want. And then as I'm looking, it's like, oh, dear, this is going to go badly down the road. So the stock exchange, I see that dropping. I also saw something that people's ideas or understanding of BlackRock, uh, the BlackRock thing is dangerous. The fact that they're taking over so many things, but they, I think Trump has kind of like encouraged Larry Fink with the idea that if we can get control of everything, we can stop the corruption and we can do something different. Well, Larry Fink is one of the most miserable people on earth. And I don't know that he knows when to stop or how to let go. So anyway, that whole thing becomes a big mess. And that is really going to cut into people's 401ks, their senior retirement investments, and that's going to make a mess there. So that will push them. There's a wonderful book. Actually, I have it here. Hang on a second. This was sent to me by somebody in Australia, and it's what it talks about is the vegetarian myth, written by a woman who was vegetarian for 20 years and destroyed her body, and said she was vegetarian for all the wrong reasons, not because her body needed it, but because she thought it was a form of justice, sustainability, on and on and on. And, when I was in naturopathic school, we learned that not a single group of people was surviving and thriving on a vegetarian diet. You have to mix up your food. You need it all. And what she points out is not only is that vegetarian story a myth, it has resulted in this tremendous violence against Mother Nature in the form of big grains, big farms, big cattle lots. And she goes into that and it makes you cry. So what I see coming that drives people in a direction that Greg was just talking about. Some people are just going to go back to basics, and they are saying, I'm going to grow my own food. I'm going to take care of myself, and so on and so forth. So I saw big farming operations affecting the food system tremendously. And then big pharmaceuticals, those are under fire. Big lawsuits coming. The downfall of Fauci and others, they have started the investigations into that. People are going to push that and they're going to want revenge and all that kind of stuff. But the result is that there's a whole lot of people that only are surviving on their pharmaceutical prescriptions. And that's going to create a die-off, and that's going to scare people. And so the split becomes even wider. Another thing is that RFK and his changes that he's making in health, people are going to look at other people. They're going to be judgmental of what those people are doing and why they're not doing certain things that this group over here says. We think this is important. And so that drives the split even further. Lifestyles are more physical, and that changes people's attitude as well. What I was seeing overall is that the big drivers of change are the changes in the people and their perception, their attitude. They completely dump the whole climate story. And part of the reason for that is the event that happened in Spain, Portugal, that taking down of their entire grid, that there's some funky stuff going on behind that. And of course, the government is saying, well, it was a very rare weather phenomenon. And other people are saying, no, it was a cyber attack, like Greg just said. Is it a cyber attack? Or is it really the fact that the magnetic field of the planet is dropping and has dropped and has huge holes in it, and it allows all kinds of stuff from the sun to hit. And some people were watching that hit and spiral right into the Rock of Gibraltar area, and boom, down went Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, a whole bunch of regions. hit their grid. It was kind of like, do you see what's happening here? Because there's a pole shift that looks like it's coming. That may make everything that we're talking about irrelevant. So another thing is that religion fades big time, right along with the climate change and the government shrinking. And the fact that we need, I'll repeat what I said earlier, we need a more spiritually minded group of leaders who are sharp as a tack with money, really good with defense, really can put their money where we need to put it, which is into development of people and science, and not technocracy. People and science, where can we go? What can we become? And I'll just close by saying, the smart races that I have had the great privilege to observe have a big focus on defense. They don't use that to attack anybody, but everybody knows, don't you touch them, because if you do, it's all out destruction of whoever was going after them. So if others, if others don't get that, they're likely to make a big mistake. Defense and food and simplicity are their big things. And the other big investment that they make is the development of people is their capital. They are not interested in big fancy houses, big fancy cars, big fancy, any of that stuff that we waste our time and money on. They are interested in developing people. And their attitude is that if something happens to our city, our infrastructure, our colony, our ship, we've got these incredibly brilliant minds that can quickly reestablish us. And so those are the big, I would say the two biggest development factors are defense and people, the development of consciousness in people. And I'll close there, but I could go on and say a whole bunch more. So.
No, we'll come back to you in just a minute here. Frank,
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, it looks like we're all kind of on the same wavelength. So I'll give you my particular take on things that might maybe in a more specific way. I see the full scale rollout of digital currencies worldwide in 2026. So if you're a cash purist, think of the next 5 to 10 years as the twilight of normal note and coin usage, with a final fading out over the subsequent coming years after that. I think for the next few years, cash will be mostly considered as a backup currency to keep in hand, only in the case of those blackouts we've just been talking about, because what do you do when nothing works, right? And I think, the realization of this might initiate kind of a mild pushback, but absent any real organized, effective plan to shut down or stop what's coming with these CBDCs and other cryptocurrencies as well, will have zero effect. I think cash days could well be numbered, and there's really no way to get the toothpaste back in the tube at this point. So I think we're going to look for kind of a form of UBI, universal basic income, that's soon going to be floated when jobs begin to dry up and disintegrate due to AI hegemony, which is going to start really accelerating in the next couple of years. And I bet that people that are mostly at or under the poverty line are going to even welcome this, because it'll sort of take the burden off of having to come up with money every month, right? There'll be kind of this like allowance, just like we were kids, right? And they kind of do treat us like kids in a way. There might be, to make the transition more palatable, another form of pandemic unleashed, which will make people afraid of touching paper bills. It's kind of what I saw a little bit of last time it happened. It was like I remember sitting at a restaurant in the early days of the pandemic, and I was looking in Austria and Bavaria. They have these big beer mugs, liter-sized beer mugs, and in them they have knives and tissues and forks. And I'm looking at that going, I'm surprised they still have them. And the next week, sure enough, they were gone, right? It's like paranoia, right? So, they're going to do whatever they can to, spread the idea of the virus, right? So, and speaking of vaccines, I think there's going to be potentially some new vaccines that are going to appear in the next couple of years. But these are going to be different because they're going to be tailored to your very own genetics. I think We've already heard hints of that from Larry Elliott at the White House on Inauguration Day, the promise of a full-scale immunity to all forms of viruses, even though no virus has ever been isolated or proven to cause disease, but people don't care. And those on the fringe that will care and do care, there'll actually might be even be laws. And the fact there are even some laws. I don't know how it is for you in the States, but over in the Europe, they're actually trying to prevent you from being able to speak up and warn others about certain dangers because they don't look at them as dangers, right? Um, Next, I see that there'll be some kind of further pushing of what's called Tesc Real. This new pseudonym, acronym, full spectrum acronym for all things related to transhumanist digital society. And there'll be a focus on. I've been reading up on this a lot on something because this word actually has a lot of words built into it. Each letter represents one word, and one of those letters, A, represents accelerationism. And that is the belief that technological societal acceleration, especially through finance or automation, AI automation, should be embraced and intensified. They need to step on the gas and because that's the only way they see to provoke any kind of radical change and to reach what they think is a new phase of human evolution. Because let's not forget, these people like Rick Kurzweil, they see the transhumanist transition as the next phase of human evolution, not the biological evolution, the technological evolution. And there'll be all kinds of amazing tech promises that'll be keeping society riveted. The next miracle in artificial general intelligence will be mesmerizing people that are uneducated in what I call the organic intelligence represents. They'll embrace them eagerly, right? And so people will begin to use AI more and more for literally everything in their lives. From shopping tips to advice on relationships. Virtual companionship between humans and AI will continue to develop more deeply. I think there'll soon be laws passed that legalize marriages between AI and humans. And I think the first human AI families are going to start to emerge, and babies might actually soon be incubated in external wombs overseen by AI, so that the next first humans will be born whose first glance at an intelligent creature will be into the robot nurse's eyes. So, and further to the AI nightmare that's coming, if it isn't stopped or even considered or talked about, culturally, they're going to enter into the arts and the mainstream. Music and film will explode. So there'll be more purely AI pop stars you're going to see, right? They already exist, but the numbers will increase. And the young people are going to just swallow this up. They're going to love it, right? You're going to have the first fully AI generated blockbuster films that'll begin to appear on a wider scale. And there's going to be major pushback, which there already has been from Hollywood unions and actors, on what is allowed. But there'll be a special designation law then that they'll pass, which will categorize arts into purely AI and purely human arts and films. And the first actors are going to, all these people in the unions are going to applaud, saying, wow, we've won something. But gradually the applause will die down because the future of mainstream culture will be determined by profitability. And very soon it'll be so much cheaper and easier to create content digitally that the real human stuff, which will be increasingly expensive, will just basically be pushed to the fringes until it disappears. And just like cash, it'll be like it's gone, right? And you might see a resurgence of nostalgia films on the fringe sector. Some people will we had vinyl, right, when digital came out. Um, Further to what Penny was saying, I think there's going to be kind of like there's this thing called the Armageddon lobby. It was in that article you sent around a couple of weeks ago, John. Very interesting. It's going to gain more influence. This is the idea that there's these apocalypticists out there who are unfortunately have a huge impact on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, and we're seeing it happen in slow motion right before our eyes. It's because, according to their narrative, our current world cannot end without a Jewish state in Palestine. That's just the way they see it, right? So there will be further justification on their end. Unfortunately, and this part really breaks my heart, brutal violence, bloody war, oppression in the Middle East that'll continue as they push for this narrative to be, basically driving us to what they're hoping for, which is some kind of a apocalyptic showdown where the Messiah shows up. And there's laws being passed to make any criticism of that biblical script and claims against the people pushing it illegal and punishable. So the resistance will be hard. And I think I read a statistic that 60% of the population already believes, whether they're religious or not, that there's going to be a messianic end time, highly likely, and that there's highly likely going to be Jesus going to return, and it'll clean up the mess, right, for humans, right? So who's going to stop that, right? And if you think about that, is resistance going to be likely? I'm thinking about it going, well, think about the sad fact that most people, and it's a scary statistic. I don't even want to, go into the actual numbers, but it's a lot of people are overweight on some form of antidepressant prescription drugs. They're unarmed more and more. They're unfit. So how are they going to rise up and go up against the military? And what military? Well, that's another thing that I have in there, and then I'll pretty much wrap up. But I think the military, we're going to start to be mobilized more and more domestically, at first under the guise of getting rid of illegal immigration for you guys in the United States. But then the focus will begin to shift toward quelling any kind of last remaining societal upheavals, should they arise, to shut down the opposition. And I think the only last thing I want to add to this has to do with something that Penny said. I think we're going to see the first human enclaves begin to appear as kind of retreat zones in rural and low density areas, communities that decide to regroup outside of the mainstream AI driven society. And there are going to be some early tensions, and they're going to trigger what you're talking about, Penny, with this governmental thing. I think there's going to be a lobby for organic personhood and it'll be chartered. It'll be made into international charters. So people will begin to actually have a document, a legal document that segregates them as organic people from non-organic people. And people are going to begin to ask themselves, do they want to stay inside the technocratic construct, or is there a better way of life elsewhere? And so this is going to be, I think, the start of this split in society that we've been talking about. Everyone's been talking about it. Some people call it a timeline split, but I think it's starting to really shape up to literally be a split in society between these two distinct ideologies. And then, so back to
Yeah,
you.
nice segue into some of the things that all of you know that we've been trying to do here at the Arlington Institute in general, and in particular in terms of our Transition Net project to essentially take the off-ramp and start the process of building a new world. And we're very actively engaged in that and raising money and all kinds of really good things. But let me briefly just run up this hierarchy, if I might, as I suggested at the beginning, and just kind of re-emphasize some of the things that you've already said. At the physical level, what you're seeing is a whole lot of decentralization in general, and also what you're going to get is a bunch of supply chain failures or degradation. And as Penny already suggested, the major retailers are already saying, and particularly they're laying it off on China and these tariffs, but they're saying that there's going to be fewer, whether it's vegetables or manufactured goods or whatever it is, that are going to be available, and you're going to have to be able to expand your perspective and your awareness and your sensitivity to the differences that allow you to adapt and move into a new direction. I mean, I live in a big wooded area here in West Virginia, and every once in a while, for one reason or another, we have to cut down trees. And, it hurts me to cut down a tree. I don't like to cut down trees. And, in the past, I've gone and talked to the trees and said, I'm really sorry, we're going to have to do this, but we got to. And there's a bigger picture and a bigger reality. And what that does then drives you into a space where you're non-judgmental and where you've got compassion and all of the other kind of characteristics that have also been mentioned here. And so there's a full spectrum of kind of a full frontal movement here, an assault, if you will, on the status quo that is going to necessarily put us all into a different kind of place. and a different way of knowing who we are and where we're going. Thank you all. Delightful conversation and very insightful. We'll come back and we'll do this all again in a couple of weeks. Quartet comes from the Arlington Institute, which is the little think tank that we put together about 35 years ago. And we're in the business of facilitating the transition to this new world. And that's what this conversation and the other programs that we've got are all about, is how do we get from here to there in the middle of the most profound change that this planet has ever seen, certainly in our lifetimes. And we hope that you'll take a look at our website, which is arlingtoninstitute.org. And you will see that we have a variety of different kind of programs, one of which is called Transition Talks, where we feature a speaker from somewhere in the world every month. Greg will be here on the 31st of May, just 3 weeks from now. And we're very much looking forward to that. Penny will be with us in June. And then Frank will be here with us in Berkeley Springs in September. And you can find out all about that at transitiontalks.org. The nice thing about that, for those of you who are not in the local area, the region, is that it's all live streamed. And so it doesn't make any difference where you live. You can watch this and you can participate and you can be a part of it for 6 months afterwards. And so I hope you'll check out those kinds of things. And then we hope you'll drop us a note, give us your comments, and we'll certainly look into them, and we'll address them when we get the chance to do so. Do come back, and thank you for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Take care.
Yes. Take care.
Thank you all, Frank.
Yeah.
Penny, John.
It's always an
you.
honor and a pleasure.
Yeah. Love you, boys.
Yeah.